Good morning, everybody, or it's probably almost afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us. And if you're able to stay for the next half hour, I think you'll really enjoy your time. We're kicking off 3 Sundays in a row. You can probably see it better if I do it this way. 3 Sundays in a row of marriage and family enrichment. So even for those of us who are not married, or those of us who are widowed, single, divorced, those of us who are young people, all of us want to learn about the beautiful sacrament of marriage and how to support others in that sacrament. So we've got a real treat for you today. Some friends of mine, Professor John Grabowski and his beautiful wife, Claire. And I'm going to give you 3 reasons why you will really benefit from listening to them today. One is that they are both theologically qualified. They both studied some theology at Steubenville University. Then Claire went on to do teaching and accounting, and John went on to become Professor of Moral Theology at the age of 28. It was a bit of a boy wonder, and he's been teaching moral theology to priests and seminarians and lay people for nearly 30 years now. But they're also pastorally qualified, because for the last 30 years they've also been working accompanying couples who are training for marriage, so who are preparing for marriage, or also accompanying couples in marriage enrichment. And the third reason is that they are personally qualified. They've lived out the vocation of marriage for 35 years. They have 5 beautiful children. I know from my own friendship with them that they've been through plenty of ups and downs and trials and tribulations and joys. They have beautiful children who are all 5 of them pursuing their own faith intentionally as Catholics, and now a whole crop of beautiful grandchildren coming along, which is just lovely. So for the next 20 minutes, John and Claire Grabowski are going to speak to you about spirituality for every day of marriage. And at the end of that, there's going to be time, 10 minutes for questions and answers. Now, if you have logged on through the Catholic Voice website and you want to ask questions, you might have to go out and it's just frozen, Tim, the visual's just frozen. So if you want to log on and ask questions, you need to go to the YouTube. So you go to YouTube and go to Catholic Voice Mass Online, and you should find us through YouTube to ask questions and make comments. But now I'm going to throw over to Claire and John Grabowski.
Hi, everyone. I'm Claire, and this is my husband, John, and we are thrilled to be here with you. It is actually evening time here in Washington, D.C., and we're getting ready for bed after this.
When Lara asked us to give this talk, she said it would be kind of like a TED Talk. I then realized that I don't know TED. I've never heard TED Talk. I've never met TED, but going online, I found out that TED talks a lot. So this will be a TED-less TED Talk, I guess. In any case, Claire's going to give me an elbow if I continue. On July 4th, 1984, Pope St. John Paul II gave one of his weekly general audiences in what has come to be known as the theology of the body. It is a particularly beautiful audience. He speaks of marriage as a mystery, a sacrament, and a prophecy. And in particular, he says that when a couple exchanges vows, what they're really giving is a prophecy of the whole of their life together. But it's also a prophecy of salvation history, because he says it pulls together the attraction of man and woman, their mutual fascination that we see in the Song of Songs, the moment of decision, of commitment that we see between Tobias and Sarah in the book of Tobit, and then the beautiful treatment of marriage in Ephesians 5, where husband and wife mutually submit to Christ and so grow in mutual reverence for each other through the grace of the sacrament.
And then 9 months after this, on April 27th, 1985, John and I stood in a church filled with family and friends on Long Island and said the following to each other.
I, John, take you, Claire, to be my wife. I promise to be true to you in good times and in bad, in sickness and in health. I will love you and honor you all the days of my life.
And I, Claire, take you, John, to be my husband. I promise to be true to you in good times and in bad, in sickness and in health. I will love you and honor you all the days of my life.
When a couple of years later in graduate school, I read St. John Paul II's reflection on the wedding vows. I thought it was beautiful. I thought it was poetic. But I have to say, after 35 years of marriage, after teaching the theology of marriage to seminarians and undergrads for 30 years, after 25 years of doing marriage ministry as a couple, to couples preparing for marriage, couples already married, I have to say that those words are more than beautiful and poetic. They are true. And I think they describe our own experience of marriage.
No, I would have to agree with John. The wedding vows do speak of extremes. They speak of good times and in bad times. They speak of sickness and in health. And I have to admit, John and I have had our share of both.
I'm thinking about good times that stand out in our marriage. I think of the birth of our children and bringing our children to the church to be baptized, to be receive the body and blood of the Lord, to be confirmed.
And just starting a life together, starting a home together and raising children and praying with each other and teaching our children to pray together.
But not just praying with our children, playing with our children, watching them play sports, watching them do clubs together.
Mm-hmm. And then watching them make accomplishments and even get married. We have two children married. We have four grandchildren now. One is due in November, and just a joy in seeing all these sacraments, and now we get to share them with our grandchildren as well.
And by the way, grandchildren are great. If you don't have any, you should get some as soon as possible, because it's all the joy of children without the sleep deprivation and the work. So put grandchildren on your to-do list.
We've also had our share of struggles too.
We have, and so a lot of them are kind of the flip side of some of those joys. The joy of having children and seeing them come into the world, but the downside. Claire had some difficult.
Pregnant.
She had some difficult pregnancies, 9 months of morning sickness in some cases.
For us, we had our first four children. Well, first three children while John was writing and working on his PhD. So that was a struggle, trying to raise children and afford to live while he was in graduate school.
Lara said I was a boy wonder. Well, I don't know about that, but it was definitely a challenge after getting a job at a university, having to publish as much as I could, as fast as I could. So that meant a lot more sleepless nights and a lot of long hours.
Exactly. And then, you don't sleep much when you have little children, but I don't know if any of you have teenagers yet, but you don't sleep much when you have teenagers either, because even though they sleep through the night, their night starts a lot later than ours does. So, yeah, so.
We had the experience of being sandwich parents for a while, taking care of our kids and teenagers, but also taking care of elderly parents at the end of their lives.
Exactly. And we also each lost a sibling during our marriage. I lost a brother of a drug overdose almost 25 years ago. And John lost a sister at age 50 of a heart attack. We've had sorrow that has really made us draw on God's grace.
We've, like every parent, we've had to kind of accompany our children through heartache, through sickness, through failure. And it's hard as a parent when you want to help your child and be there and you can't take away their pain.
Exactly. So, And we've had financial problems ourselves and also had to watch our children struggle through financial problems. But sometimes the blessings and the joys are interconnected with the hard times. And we've learned that the hard times sometimes turn out to be the biggest blessings in our lives.
True. We've definitely had the experience, and we know, talking to other couples, we're not alone in this. There are points in your marriage where you hit the wall and you just say, Lord, I can't do this.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when you learn that Christ can do it through you. It's Christ who can continue to love, continue to forgive, continue to serve when you can't. And that's when you really learn how deep that well of grace in the center of your marriage is, that it just never runs dry. And the suffering that we experience is sometimes the Lord's way of reminding us to draw from that well, to draw from Him and not from ourselves, and to ask Him to give us a bigger bucket so we can draw more water from that well. C.S. Lewis once said, God whispers in our pleasures, but He shouts in our pains. And when we struggle, when we suffer, that's when we are more likely to turn to the Lord.
And when I look back on our marriage of 35 years, I'm grateful for the blessings. But sometimes I think I'm more grateful for the times of suffering, because they are what really have caused John and I to call upon the Lord, to see our dependency on Him. And we've seen it in our children as well. It's not like I'd like to go through these times again. I don't want to say, God, can I do that again? No, but I'm grateful I did, because they were really blessed times in our lives.
I think of one example of one of these times, probably about 12 or 13 years ago in our marriage. We lost my sister unexpectedly, as Claire said.
Right, and then 6 months later, we lost my father.
So we had deaths of people very close to us whom we loved. I injured my back. We have a discrepancy in how that happened. We have kind of different stories. But I ended up with 2 torn discs in my lower back and chronic pain for just years, and tried a lot of different kinds of treatment and didn't get much relief. I was also taking care of my mother at the end of her life, and her health was failing. So I was battling emotional and physical pain, didn't really process it in a very good way, and turned a lot of it inward. So it turned to depression, did a lot of self-medicating with alcohol, and that did not help depression. There's a life hack for everyone. And in the middle of all of that, Claire came down with an autoimmune disease that was very painful, but it was also like completely debilitating to her. She just lost the ability to do a lot of things. So it was a difficult time.
This was a really hard time in our life. But again, when I think back on it, I think it was the time in our life where we grew the most and where we saw our children grow the most. I can remember one time when I first got sick, and I was unable to do a lot of things. I couldn't drive a car. I couldn't cook. I couldn't move my arms. So I had to depend a lot on people. And I have to say, John was struggling with his own issues. So my children stepped up to the plate, our children, and God just worked through them. They served us. They helped me. One Christmas, my teenage boys took the initiative and drove me to go Christmas shopping. And not only did they help me buy the presents, they came home and wrapped the presents. And then my daughters, my teenage daughters, did all the Christmas baking. And we make a lot of cookies because we like our cookies. And they made the cookies, they made the Christmas dinner. We were truly blessed. And I just saw God working in them and then maturing, and they taking on their own faith through serving their mom and their dad and their family. It was really beautiful. The other thing that I'd love to share with you, just because this is a story that is dear to my heart, because it just shows how God provides not only for our needs, but sometimes for our wants. And this was near the end of my sickness and our struggles, and John was recovering. And I remember sitting in my bed praying one day, and I specifically said to God, "Okay, God, thank you for all of my blessings. You've done a lot for us." I said, "But I think it's time that John and I start doing some of the serving. I'm grateful for the people who have taken care of us, but I'm ready to start serving you and your church." And I specifically said, "Can you show John and I how we can serve the church as a couple? We're really ready to do this." While I was at it, because I'm not afraid to ask God for what I also want, I said, "Our anniversary's next year. We're celebrating 25 years. I said, I would love to go to Rome for my anniversary." And this was August. Our anniversary was the following April. So, I wrote it down, I prayed, and I left it there. Well, a couple months later, I was driving to work. John was recovering from back surgery, and he called me on my cell phone, and he said, "Something's happening. I'm receiving congratulations from my colleagues, and they're congratulating us for something big." I said, "Well, what is it?" And he said, "I'm not quite sure yet. I'll call you back." And he called me back a little while later, and he said, "I found out that we have been appointed to the Pontifical Council for the Family." And I said, "Oh, okay. So what does this mean? First of all, what about we? I'm not a theologian. I'm a mom. I'm a mother. I don't know this theology stuff." And I said, "And what does it mean?" And he said, "Well, all I can tell you is this." He said, "I think we're going to be serving the church as a couple." And he said, "And I know we're going to Rome in February." And I couldn't believe it. My two prayers, God answered so well. I would always say, if I were God, I couldn't do as good as that. He just really took care of everything. And it showed me that he doesn't just love us to do holy things. He loves us to be happy and to enjoy our life together. So that was a huge blessing to me. I'm very grateful for it.
And it really was a blessing being on the Pontifical Council. We got to serve together for 6 years and made wonderful friends from all over the world, from Australia, from the Philippines, from India, from Nigeria, from Israel,
From France, from Ireland,
from Mexico, from Canada. So it was a wonderful experience of the universality of the church, but just meeting other people who loved marriage and who wanted to serve the Lord and serve his plan for marriage. A PS to Claire's story, about 7 years ago, we were getting ready for one of these trips to Rome for a meeting, and Pope Benedict had just resigned. Pope Francis had just been elected to the chair of Peter, and Claire came down with a nasty case of shingles and cellulitis and landed in the hospital for a week. And by the time she was better, her only question was, "Can I go to Rome in a couple of weeks?" And the doctors told her she could. So we went to Rome together. We had a private audience with the new Pope, Pope Francis, and we were actually the first couple chosen to go and greet the Holy Father. So we're going forward to do that. And my normally very talkative wife couldn't say a word. So I introduced us to the Holy Father and asked him if he would just remember her in his prayers because she had been sick. And without hesitation, Pope Francis put his hand on her head and prayed over her. It was just a beautiful and very powerful moment.
It was amazing. Again, it just shows me God's love and faithfulness to me. I had suffered in a hospital without having a lot of visitors because I was in an infectious disease place for shingles. And, I was lonely and people prayed for me and everything. But when I got to Rome, the Pope put his hand on my head and prayed over me. It was just, God was just saying, "Don't worry, I got this. I'm taking care of you. And I'm going to show you that you're loved." And
Beautiful.
he's done that many times in my life. I'm very, very grateful.
So back to the original words of St. John Paul II. Well, the church tells us that because of our baptism, we are priest, prophet, and king. A married couple in the Western church, when we marry each other, so we act as priests. St. John Paul II tells us that we are prophets because those vows that we exchange are a prophecy of our life together. The kingship is learning to live it out, learning to serve each other in our daily lives. St. John Paul II has a beautiful way of putting this. He says, the language of the body, in other words, all the ways we show affection and love, our communication, our physical touch, our sexual relationship, all of that, he says, is an extension of and an articulation of the liturgical language, the language of the vows by which a couple becomes one.
And this is actually a key that we try to pass on to the couples that we work with in marriage ministry, which we love doing. And if you want to learn a little bit more about it and how we do marriage ministry, you can check out our website, which is marriage4life.net. So that's marriageforlife.net. But if you want to just see our day-to-day activities and the things we pray for and stories about our family, go to my Instagram where I post a little more things like that. And it's marriage.4.life. Okay.
So the number 4.
Exactly.
Marriage.4.life.
And maybe Laura can post them sometime. That would be great.
We will post them.
Okay. So I just want to thank you all for coming and for hearing our story. And I hope that we touched your hearts a little bit. And if you have any questions or thoughts, please let Laura know and we can talk about them.
We'd love to hear from you.
Oh.
Great. Okay. So I'm going to hand on a couple of questions now. I'll give you a little bit of a heads up so you've got a bit of warning. I'll give you 3 questions so you can be thinking as you go. So one of the questions, which you can answer last, is about when you were first married. Can you remember some unhelpful behaviours that perhaps weren't very helpful to you in your married life? And that, I guess giving advice to newly married couples, some of the things you didn't know, some life hacks that you know now that you wish you'd known then. And the other 2 questions are, you've talked about suffering in your marriage. You've had suicide, you've had, physical pain, you've had all sorts of suffering and deaths and so on. So one question is, how do you go about drawing on the sacrament? What do you do to draw on the sacrament? And the other question is, and you can answer them whichever order you like. So how do you draw on the sacrament? But what about when the suffering isn't coming from outside the marriage? What about when the suffering is your spouse, which for most of us is a fairly regular, we experience pain just in the trying to relate with each other. So 3 questions. When you were first married, what were some things you wish you would have done differently? When you're experiencing pain from outside, how do you draw on the sacrament? And also, what about when you're experiencing pain from inside and you can't maybe relate to each other necessarily to get hold of that grace?
Where do you want to start?
We'll start at the beginning of our marriage.
Okay.
Because when John and I first got married, I'm from, I don't know if you know the United States well, but I'm from New York and John is from Wisconsin, and which is in the middle of the country. And we went to graduate school and we lived near his mother, who was a widow. And this was really hard because his mother, didn't matter who he married, she wouldn't have loved her or liked her very much. So I was that girl that took her son away. And it took us at least a year or two, a couple of years, to really come together and be on a united front. And for John to let his mother know that our relationship was him and I with her. And that was a tough one. It took a while. And I would say for a newly married couple that it's really important to have your foundation as a couple and your traditions and your time. How would you add to that?
Learning to set boundaries.
That's a good word.
With your family of origin, especially. And my mother she was kind of used to having things her way. So we had to say, Mom, we can do that. We love you. We can do these things. We are not going to do these things. So
Right.
that negotiation, but as Claire said, the key was learning to talk it through
Exactly.
and say, this is what we're going to do together.
Exactly. To be united in the way we related.
So to the second question,
Which one?
how do you draw on the grace when you're suffering? I mean, I think a couple of things that come to mind immediately. Developing not just a personal prayer life, but developing a prayer life as a couple, learning to pray together so that you can cry out to the Lord together, and then learning to together come to the Lord in the sacraments, because in the Eucharist, in reconciliation, the Lord refreshes that wellspring of grace that's in the sacrament of marriage.
Exactly. And the other two things that I would say along with that is, one, making it a practice to go to confession regularly. We've over the years have just discovered that the more you go to confession, the better. And but most importantly as well is not to go to sleep at night without saying you're sorry, without
reconciling.
Exactly. So that, which is really important, to just, you might not agree on things, but sorry for ways you hurt each other. That's really, really important.
That way, when you're going through suffering, you're going through it as one,
Right.
and you can support each other. But to the final question, what about when the suffering is your spouse, when it's within your marriage? And that really is, that's every marriage, right? Because for fallen creatures like us, learning to love another person is hard. It's dying to self. One of our dear friends likes to say, as Jesus said in the Gospels, take up your spouse and follow me. So learning to love this other person, as wonderful as she is, it makes me die to myself, and that hurts. And some days that's harder than others.
But I also think that it's important to, because when we were going through our hard time and John was struggling with depression and, some alcoholism, I found that I was holding things in and not talking to anyone. And it took a while for me to realize I needed to talk. I couldn't talk to him about these things right there. So I needed to find friends. I needed to find other women that I could relate to and just get it off my chest.
So having community, having Christian
is so
friends
important
to talk to, so that you're not trying to get all of your needs met through your spouse.
Exactly.
Very good. Very good. It's hard for me to tell when the cameras come back onto me, but hopefully it has been. Look, that was wonderful. And we've had some comments in here saying that's gold. Thank you so much for sharing that. So that's wonderful. Look, I think we will leave it there. And I forgot to mention to people that you're actually in Washington and that it's, nearly 10 o'clock at night over there, or past, I can't remember. But
10:15.
10:15. Thank you so much for waiting up for us to join us.
Thank you for inviting us.
Yeah. And just to let people know, if they come back to the Catholic Voice website or the YouTube, I'm not sure, we will put in your links to your website. But also, John and Claire have just been on an amazing marriage summit where there's been 70 couples. All the talks are by couples, husbands and wives together, sharing. And so they've shared their story there, and 70 other couples with lots of life experience, all different experience of different difficulties in their lives, are accessible to you. So we'll put that up also on the Archdiocesan website so that you can link in to that resource as well if you want to. Otherwise, come back here next Sunday, same time, same channel, around about 11:45 or 11 o'clock if you're joining us for Mass, and stay on with us for the next 2 Sundays. But once again, Claire and John, thank you so much for your generosity. All of this online stuff actually takes quite a bit of effort and a bit of stress trying to, for those of us who are, over 40. So it's really, really generous and wonderful of you to join us. Thank you so much for sharing your marriage and your experience and your wisdom with us. God bless.
Thank you again for the invitation.
Yes, and God bless you all.
Okay. See you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye.